All right, in this video, we're going to build on the previous one where we were reading in data and talking a little bit about subsetting. And now I'm just going to show you a slightly different way of reading in data that can help with some features and will introduce us to this idea of the Tidyverse, which is a suite of packages. And we'll talk about packages that we will be using for the rest of class. So first and foremost, we are going to install and load in the Tidyverse. And the Tidyverse, like I said, is a suite of packages. You can actually read all about it online if you Google Tidyverse. But a step back and first, what are packages? So you'll notice that we've been using functions like call names, like summary, like structure, like read.csv, all of which are built into R, and you don't need to go download those anywhere. They live inside R. But the beauty of R, and one of the reasons we use it, is that it's a free open source software package, and anyone can build functions and then put them into a CRAN repository or make them available on GitHub, and pretty much say, hey, anyone who wants to use the functions I've made can download them, install them as a package, and then run them. So it's incredibly useful. There are, who knows, I don't know how many packages are out there, a lot. Which actually, if you can explore them in here. There's a systems library that will list them and give them some summaries. I typically don't install packages from here. I will go use, again, a base function called install.packages. And then when you first install a package, you have to put the package name in quotation marks, because this is essentially telling R to go look into this giant repository of all the packages that exist and download that one. So if you have never installed Tidyverse before, you should run this line, but it's important to know that you only have to install packages once. Once it's installed, it will live on your computer until it needs updated, and R will notify you of that, etc. But it will then download, you'll get something like this in your output that say it has been downloaded, and it will tell you that you have successfully downloaded this package. But then you can sort of comment that out or delete it. You'll often see this install.packages either commented out, or sometimes people just put it in their console because you only need it once. But then you do have to, each time you open a new R session, load the packages you want into your library. And we'll talk a little bit about why this is true. It has to do with memory and processing and not getting functions confused. But essentially, you need to then use the function library, and then inside the parentheses of that library function, name the package you want to load in. But now, because R knows what the Tidyverse is, it lives somewhere downloaded in your RStudio, you don't need to put it in quotation marks. You can if you want, but you also do not have to. And you have to make sure you run library Tidyverse. And then you should get some sort of notifications that say attaching packages, and it will list actually a bunch of stuff. Because when I say that the Tidyverse is a universe of packages, it includes all 8 of these packages: ggplot2, tibble, tidyr, reader, per, dplyr, stringer, and forcats. And we are going to talk mostly about ggplot2 later in the class, but we will be kind of implicitly using functions from places like dplyr and tidyr, and a little bit of tibble. So these are good to just know what these packages are each called. We can also talk a little bit in class about conflicts. You might have these warning messages, that's okay. And so as long as you're getting something like this, then you are in and installed. And so now what this means is that we can use the functions from the Tidyverse packages. And so someone asked, I think last week, like, where do you go for a list of functions? And the answer, like most things, are the internet. So if I actually go ahead and Google something like dplyr documentation, right? So I chose one of the packages that we'll be using, and I want to find out, like, what are all the functions inside the dplyr package. You'll see first that there are a lot of things that come up, and one of the reasons that we use the Tidyverse package is because this is a very well documented set of packages. There are some debates. It's not perfect, but it is incredibly well documented and relatively intuitive. So you can open any one of them, you'll find you'll begin to notice that there are a few standard sort of websites that will host descriptions of packages. This was not actually the one that I was looking for, because many of them, I want to know where its actual like CRAN repository is. Okay, so I actually should have gone to the one at cran.r project. And this is the document that almost, I think every package that lives in CRAN, and we can talk about that, is. And it will tell you package dplyr, it will tell you who made it, it will tell you all sorts of things about the other packages that it uses or requires. And then you will have this long list of all of the names of functions that it uses. And essentially, this is one giant help file for the package. So we can go ahead and just pick one of them. We can use the one filter. This is a function we'll learn in a little bit. And it'll bring me down to filter, and then this is just kind of a big help file. It will describe it, it will tell the arguments that it uses, hopefully give some examples down at the bottom, etc. So this is how you start learning about what functions you need to know. And that's a good way to kind of understand what is inside this Tidyverse package. But for today, we're just going to focus on really one of them, which is an alternative to read.csv, but it's very similar, and that is read_csv. So this option was not in our like list of possible functions until we loaded the Tidyverse into our library. And you'll see there's kind of a lot more specifications that can happen here. But read_csv is going to take the same argument as read.csv. So it's file equals quotation marks. We're going again into our data folder / and taking that portal_data_joined.csv. And we're going to name it something, but let's name it, let's not, so if we named this surveys, we would overwrite the surveys data frame that we already read in. So instead, I want to make it a little different just so that we can compare it and call it surveys_t. And when I run this, you'll see that they look almost the same, right? Nothing has changed significantly about our data. But the big difference here is that the Tidyverse read_csv reads in data as a tibble, which is essentially a special data frame. And it's just kind of makes things easier to read. So if I ask, again, if I use this class function, which I went over in the last video, is a way of looking at the type of data something is. Our surveys T is a lot more things than our just our surveys object. So again, if I remember what the surveys object is, the surveys object is just a data frame, but the surveys T, this surveys tibble, is a data frame, but is also a tibble data frame, and a special tibble data frame, like lots of things, which doesn't mean a whole lot, except quite frankly, it's just a bit like easier to read in the output. So if we do something like this head of surveys T, you'll see a few things happened. And again, maybe we should compare this to the head of surveys. So our head of surveys circles around. We can see, you know, we didn't really point this out before, but now we used to have blanks, for instance, where there was no data in the sex column, for instance. But you'll notice that the tibble kind of makes a much cleaner output. It will actually summarize the type of data in the head printout, and it automatically changes the empty cells to NAs and also calls those to your attention in the printout of the tibble. And so we can dive into kind of the nuanced differences between these things more in class, but I just want to introduce these kind of two ways of reading in data. We might jump back and forth between them. We could talk about what the difference, when to use and why to use. But this is our starting point for saying, okay, we have data, we can get it in R, and now we're going to start to summarize, subset, and investigate it. And that's where we will pick up. But I will note, so I just saved my notes file, and just good habit is to always, whenever you're taking notes, to make sure that you are, you know, updating your GitHub profile. So now if I go over into Git, you can see that Git knows that I just saved my notes folder. So it's good to remind you of these steps where I'm going to click on this commit button. and then going to stage the documents that I've changed. I'm going to write a note for my commit message. I'm going to press commit. I'm going to get a little summary of those changes. I'm going to close and then remember to click push so that this will push head to master. And now these updates are saved into your GitHub repository so that if you lose them somehow, you can roll back and find them. And so that's all I've got for now. See you in class.